Session, jurors and alternates.
All have returned. Mr. Durst is present, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Chestnut. And we have Mr. Bailey and Mr. Henderson at council table. Mr. Miata present also. Detective Coulter is resuming the witness stand. I'll remind you that you're under oath. You may continue with your cross-examination.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Then redirect examination, Mr. Bailey.
No questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
May this witness be excused.
Yes.
You're excused, Detective. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
People call Laraine Newman, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Wish I had those jokes.
Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I'm not as funny. I once had a juror who was a yoga teacher. This is not a joke. This actually happened. And during the breaks, I asked her to lead the jurors in yoga, do some healthy stretching during the wait. And she didn't appreciate it. She was.
I would try, Your Honor, but I'm afraid I'd get up.
Your brother charges most $15 a day.
Except right behind the court order.
Over here, over here, over here.
There you go, right there. Thank you. Now, before you sit, could you stand, please? Pardon me?
Please stand.
Please stand. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God? I do. Please be seated. If you could please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Laraine, L-A-R-A-I-N-E, Newman, N-E-W-M-A-N.
Thank you.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Newman, what is your current occupation?
Voiceover animation.
And in the past, were you also an actress and entertainer?
Sketch player, yeah.
And in terms of your sketch playing, you were one of the original Saturday Night Live Not Ready for Primetime players, is that correct?
Yes.
And that included you, Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, Jane Curtin, Garrett Morris, who did I forget?
Gilda
Radner. And at the time that you started, that was in what year?
1975.
And how old were you at that time?
23.
And how did you, in terms of the age, your age versus the other cast members, you were the youngest, is that correct?
Yes.
And how long did you work for Saturday Night Live in that capacity?
5 years.
So I'm going to ask you, as you sit here today, how do you feel about being in court?
Not thrilled.
Would not thrilled be an understatement, an overstatement, or pretty accurately reflect where you're at?
Pretty accurate.
Have you previously been asked on repeated occasions how you feel about having to be involved in a case like this?
Yes.
And can you tell us how you feel?
I just, I don't, it's a morbid subject. I feel like anything more I could say about it might be inappropriate other than I just don't want to be part of something that is so morbid.
In addition, since your time at Saturday Night Live, is it fair to say that you became, in the mid-'70s and the late '70s, a very nationally known figure?
I guess, yeah.
And in terms of the fame and what came with it, have you had apprehensions about what coming to court would mean in terms of discussions about your personal life?
Well, I'm not that, famous, so I don't think anybody's paying much attention, but for my work, it concerns me because, I do cartoon voices, and so being associated with something like this worries me.
In addition, over the past 50-plus years, have you had some struggles with substance abuse?
Yes,
And has that been, up until pretty recently, somewhat of a private area in your life that you didn't really discuss much?
correct.
And did that weigh into your reluctance to be involved in this case?
Yes,
And in fact, did you state that you were concerned that because of your drug history that you were going to be impugned?
yes.
I want to ask you, when I say the name Susan Berman, is that a name you recognize?
Yes.
And how did you and Susan Berman meet?
She was doing an article on the SNL cast for Us magazine. She was the interviewer, and we became friends.
And I want to go back. When SNL started, the first season was 1975, is that correct?
Yes,
And is it fair to say that the response in terms of how you guys kind of took over the public consciousness was somewhat surprising?
yes,
And did that lead then to a lot of publicity for you and other members of the cast?
yes,
And you said that Susan Berman was involved in doing an article. Was that on you or on the whole SNL cast?
the whole cast.
And can you tell me what kind of interaction did you have with her with respect to that article?
Well, she interviewed us all individually, and we kind of had a kind of communication that you have when you spark to someone and want to be friends with that person. We had similar backgrounds growing up and kind of reminisced about growing up in Los Angeles, and I loved her. She was incredibly funny, incredibly smart, and a lot of fun.
And at the time that you met her, you were living in New York, is that correct?
Yes.
Up until that time, you grew up basically in Beverly Hills, is that right? Not on the west side?
Westwood, yeah, Westwood, Beverly Hills.
And did you become aware that Susan had also spent time in some of those same locales?
Yes.
If I were to ask you, how close were the two of you back then when she was doing this article?
Well, she was probably one of my closest girlfriends. I didn't have time to have friends outside of the show because the schedule was intense.
What was the schedule like in terms of how many hours a week were you working back then?
Jesus, that I couldn't tell you.
I'm sorry?
I couldn't tell you that. I'm not good with that kind of thing. I would say, we pitched the idea for a sketch on Monday. Lauren Michaels will assign what thing to work on. We write all night into Tuesday, all night, and then Wednesday we have a read-through. Thursday is camera blocking. Friday is camera blocking. Saturday is the dress rehearsal and then the air show live.
And the, if reports are correct, some members of that original 7 also found time for other activities outside the show, is that right?
Yeah.
Can you tell me, at that time, how often were you and Susan seeing or speaking to each other?
Seeing each other, I couldn't see her that often, but when we had time off, I would see her, and we talked on the phone a lot.
And was that while the two of you were both in New York at this point?
Yes.
If I were to ask you, what was Susan Berman like? Can you describe her for me?
She was very gregarious, as I said, very smart, very funny, and if she loved you, you know, it was like a juggernaut of love. It was a wonderful feeling to be her friend.
At that time in your life, given that I assume when you started SNL in 1975, you were pretty much unknown, is that correct?
Correct.
And within a couple of years, is it fair to say that you're surrounded by celebrity?
Yes.
And at that point in time, was it hard to kind of figure out who was Laraine Newman's friend versus who was just trying to get close to all of this incredible energy and fame that the show was producing?
That's fair to say, yes.
And if I were to ask you, in terms of your impression of Susan, what kind of friend was she to you?
She was pretty close. She was the only friend I had that was not involved with the show at all. And as I said, we talked a lot on the phone, and I don't know if that suggests, I only hope that that would suggest what it was, which was an intense bonding experience.
Do you know, to the best of your memory, did she have a similarly close relationship with any of the other 6 original cast members?
No.
And you indicated the first season was 1975, is that right?
That's right.
And how long were you on the show?
5 years.
And among them, the, I'm sure you'll kill me for asking this, but Connie Conehead, Sherry the Valley Girl, those were 2 of yours, correct?
Yes.
And in terms of your departure from the show, did that also involve you coming back to Los Angeles?
Yes.
While you were, and in fact, even prior to getting onto Saturday Night Live, did you have issues with drugs?
Yes.
And can you tell us briefly, when did that start?
When I was 13.
And was this something that was ongoing while you were involved in Saturday Night Live as well?
Yes.
And in terms of your, strike that. When you ended up relocating to Los Angeles, was that before or after Susan Berman relocated?
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you remember if you had contact with Susan after the 2 of you were in Los Angeles?
Oh, yes.
And can you describe what that relationship was like?
Well, it was before I had kids, so I had a lot of time to spend with her. And when she was engaged, I gave her a wedding shower. We talked a lot. She would have moments of real distress, fear, insecurity, because she'd invested a lot of her money trying to get pregnant and was not successful and was not doing as well as she had hoped as a writer.
So I want to go back. When she first came out here, did you ever visit her the first time that she lived in the Benedict Canyon house?
Yes.
And at that time, do you recall anything about the condition of the house?
I don't.
If when I say the name Mr., is that somebody that you recognize?
Yeah, that was her husband.
And can you explain, when you say her husband, do you recall if Susan and Mr. were married in June of 1983?
I couldn't tell you the date, but if you say so, yeah.
Does that sound about the right time?
Yeah.
It was after you had come out to Los Angeles, is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes.
And do you recall, were you involved in any of the wedding activities for Susan?
Not the actual wedding, just the shower.
And you were actually the one who threw her the shower, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you know what happened to Mr.?
Yes.
What happened?
He died of a heroin overdose.
And was that shortly after they were married?
I mean, define shortly. They weren't together that long, they split up. And while they were apart, not together, was when this happened.
Is it fair to say that Mr.'s drug problems and subsequent death were a heavy issue for Susan?
Oh, yes.
If I were to ask you, was Susan an easy, low maintenance, or kind of a more difficult, high maintenance kind of friend?
She was a high maintenance person. She was very intense, very passionate about the things that she cared about. So yeah, not low maintenance, no.
And in terms of your closeness to her when you were in Los Angeles, at least originally, when the two of you were here before you had your children, were you as close as you were in New York?
Yes.
And how
absolutely.
often did you see her at the beginning?
I couldn't tell you that. It's hard for me to estimate that. It's such a long time ago and I don't remember.
And I'm not asking more, you know, I saw her once a week, et cetera, but did you have contact with her, would you think, you know, weekly or monthly or every 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, at least on the phone, weekly, yes.
Can you tell me, I want to go back to New York for a second, what was Susan's financial situation when she lived in New York?
I think she was okay. She was, I think she had money she inherited from her father.
Was your impression in spending time with her that when she was in New York City, that she was financially comfortable?
Yes,
Did you ever visit her her place on Beekman?
yes.
And was that a nice address?
Very, very much so, yes.
And did you see a change in her financial status at some point after she moved to Los Angeles?
Yes.
And can you describe what you noticed, what happened?
Well, it started to change when she lived on Coyne, which is a street in, I guess you'd call it Brentwood. I had not been in that much communication with her when she moved from Coyne back to the Benedict Canyon house. But I think between that time was when things started to go badly for her financially.
And I want to stop you for a second. At some point, you ended up getting married, is that correct?
Yes.
Do you remember when that was?
Let's see, it was 89.
And sometime after that, you had a couple of children, is that right?
Yes,
And when was your first child born?
1991.
And do you recall if you continued to have the same level of contact with Susan after you were married and had children as you did before?
I did not. I did not have the same level.
And were the financial problems that you noticed, were those, if you can put them into kind of a timeline, were those, to best you remember, before you had your children, after you had your children, both? Do you remember?
I think it would be after I had my children because it was kind of a parallel situation where she was trying to have children also.
And do you recall if you ever loaned her any money?
Yes,
And if I were to ask you, was it more than one time?
yes,
And if I were to ask you how much money you loaned her, do you recall?
I don't.
Do you remember if she paid you the money back?
Always.
If I were to ask you, on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being absolutely the least manipulative person I've ever met, and 100 being, wow, an extremely manipulative person, where would you put Susan?
70?
And if I were to ask you in particular, was Susan the kind of person who, in your experience, was talented at figuring out how to kind of get what she wanted? And I'm not talking personally.
It's hard to answer that. You know, it's depending on what it was that she wanted. She was very savvy about the industry and what she needed to do to get writing jobs. She ended up writing books because she was just not getting anywhere with scripts, but you know, she knew how to play the game that way.
Do you recall, Susan, was she somebody who you would say had a good memory or a poor memory?
An astonishing memory.
And what makes you say that?
She could remember conversations verbatim, and that was part of how funny she was when she would regale me with those stories.
And did Susan have a good sense of humor as well?
Very good, yes.
When I say the name Robert Durst, is that a name that you recognize?
Yes,
And is that a name that Susan Berman talked about?
yes.
And what would she say about, do you remember what she called him? Did she call him Robert or Bob or Bobby?
Bobby, yeah.
Do you remember what she would say to you about Bobby Durst?
She loved him.
And,
They were best friends from school.
and is that something that she would tell you?
Yes.
And in particular, what did she say specifically about him, who he was?
I don't recall if she was specific about the source of his money, other than that he was wealthy. But it was just in her giving me his bio, it wasn't really important, it wasn't, paramount to her. It was more the bond they had in college, the closeness that they had.
Did Susan make clear to you if, from her perspective, if the way that she felt about Bobby was reciprocated?
I think she believed it was, yes.
Did Susan ever mention anything about Bob Durst giving or loaning her money?
Yes.
Did she ever tell you that Bob was, quote, always bailing her out?
Yes.
And do you recall if she mentioned if this was more than one time?
Yes, it was more than one time.
And do you recall saying previously that she said that Bob had helped her out 4 or 5 times?
I don't recall saying that many times, but I could say it was quite a bit.
And did she indicate to you at any point in time if she viewed Bob Durst as somebody that she could go to for money?
Because of their friendship, yes.
When I say the name Kathy Durst, is that anybody that you recall that you ever met?
No, never met her.
Did Susan ever mention, and I want to, with the exception of the area that we're going to get to about her disappearance, but did Susan ever mention Kathy prior to that?
I don't remember.
Were you aware as to the nature of Susan and Bob's relationship in terms of what she said? In other words, did she represent that Bob was a boyfriend kind of guy or a close friend or like a brother? How would she refer to him?
As a close friend, almost like a brother.
And in the way that she spoke about Bob Durst, was there anybody else that she appeared to speak as much about in her life?
Honestly, he was up there. There were some people, but not. I mean, he was certainly among the people she spoke the most about.
Do you recall if you knew back then that Bob Durst was married?
I don't recall that at all.
And if I were to ask you, when I say the name Kathy Durst, you know who she is today, is that correct?
I do, yes.
Do you know how you found out that she had disappeared?
Susan told me that she had provided an alibi for him, for Bobby, in relation to the disappearance.
And can you tell me specifically what do you remember her saying to you about that?
Not specifically, no.
Your Honor, excuse me, can we get a time frame, a better foundation?
So you'll do that? You'll establish when the statement was made?
I mean, I think that can be, I don't think I'm required to foundationally.
No, I appreciate it. It's useful.
I will do the exam. I will end up covering what I need to cover.
Very well, as you wish. It's not vague as to time. It's acceptable. Go that way.
So, to the best of your memory, and I'm going to ask you for a direct quote, what did she say to you about what, if anything, she had done with respect to Kathy's disappearance?
That she had provided an alibi for Bobby. And, it's vague, but I remember her saying that she made a phone call.
And do you recall her using, to the best of your memory, the word alibi?
Yeah, I think she did. I'm not 100% sure, but yes.
And do you recall, to the best of your memory, her saying that she had made a call?
Objection, Your Honor.
What would, I'm sorry?
What's your objection?
Asked and answered.
Overruled. Overruled. You may answer.
Can you repeat the
Sure.
question?
Your Honor, I'd ask for a foundation now. To time frame of when? We're talking about years ago.
Your Honor, these are the same speaking objections that the
Okay.
court has told me that I'm not allowed to do.
Neither
So,
side. Thank you. Overruled.
do you need me to ask the question for you again?
I can only say that it was once we were both back in Los Angeles.
Right, and my question was, do you specifically, to the best of your memory, recall Susan telling you that she had made a phone call for Bob?
Yes.
If I were to ask you, how certain are you, not regarding the time, but how certain are you that Susan said to you that she had provided Bob with an alibi? What would your response be?
100%.
And in discussing this alibi, did she indicate to you whether or not, in other words, this was an actual alibi or whether she had done something false?
It was something false.
And if I were to ask you, how sure are you, to the best of your memory, that she said she had made a phone call with respect to providing this alibi?
I couldn't hear the last part
Sure.
of what you said.
How sure are you with respect to Susan saying that in providing this alibi, it had been in making a phone call?
100%.
Have you been previously interviewed by detectives and myself and DA investigators in this case?
Yes.
And I want to go back in terms of your providing this information that I just asked you about. Were you asked, and did you provide this information during an interview with myself and investigators in 2015?
Yes.
And in terms of your wanting to become involved, when you were interviewed in 2015, how did you feel about the prospect of having to come to court?
I wanted no part of it.
And at a point in time when you provided this information, did you, let me back up, I'm sorry. Let me back up a second, I apologize, I got out of order here. When Susan told you this information, what she had done, do you remember what your response was? In other words, did you respond enthusiastically or did you respond negatively?
I responded negatively.
And was Susan someone who was perceptive in terms of interpersonal relationships?
Yes.
And if I were to ask you, a little perceptive, moderately perceptive, extremely perceptive, where would you put her?
Extremely perceptive.
And given your relationship with her, and given how the two of you interact, is it your belief that you communicated to her your disapproval with what she had done?
Yes.
And as a result of that, did she continue to discuss it?
No, she never did again.
And have you previously been asked about this issue before?
Before 2015?
No, in 2015, were you asked about this?
Yes.
And at the time, to your best of your memory, did you in fact convey this same information that Susan had realized that you didn't like what she was hearing, what she was telling you, and that she immediately moved on and didn't bring up the subject again?
That's right.
Given your relationship with Susan, would that be something unusual in terms of Susan basing what she's going to tell you dependent upon what your reaction is to something?
Can you ask me that in a different way?
Sure. So you said that Susan told you this and you indicated your disapproval, and that she immediately kind of moved on and never brought it up again.
That's right.
Is that consistent or inconsistent with the kind of relationship you had with Susan?
I think the only way I can answer that is to say that that particular situation was not an aspect of any other aspect of our friendship. It was a singular event. So nothing like that ever happened before or since.
So what you're saying is that this is the only time you can remember where Susan told you part of a story, you responded that way, and then she never brought it up again.
That's correct.
Do you recall when you were asked this question by myself and investigators during the interview, and you gave the information? I'm sorry, let me back up. I apologize. It's been a long day for me. Did Susan, after you responded the way that you did she attempt to kind of take back or rescind the statement?
Yes,
And do you recall what she did?
I do not.
Do you recall previously telling investigators in 2015 that what stuck in your mind was, because it was serious, that she rescinded it, that it was important to her to kind of backpedal? Do you recall using those words?
Yes, I do.
Do those accurately describe the situation?
Yes.
And you indicated, had you ever had any other interaction with her where she had attempted to retract or rescind something?
No.
Was Susan the kind of person who, in the course of your relationship, was very willing to discuss issues and things that had gone on in her life?
Absolutely.
So if I were to ask you in terms of your relationship with her, if I were to say, was Susan the kind of person who did not share much with you, or was she the kind of person that shared a lot, or was she the kind of person that maybe even shared too much? What would you say?
She shared a lot. I don't know how to quantify whether it was too much.
And did she ever bring up this issue of providing Bob Durst an alibi?
Again?
Ever again?
No.
If I were to ask you, do you have a clear memory as to the fact that Susan Berman said she provided an alibi by making a phone call? Do you have a clear memory of that?
Yeah.
Or do you...
Your Honor, I have an objection.
Well, state the objection.
Okay.
Your Honor, I thought the objections were supposed to wait till the end of the
Okay, I'm
question.
sorry. You're right.
Finish your question.
Okay, let me start it over. So ma'am, if I were to ask you, do you have a clear memory as you sit here today of the fact that Susan Berman told you that she had made a call to provide Bob Durst a false alibi, or as to when that conversation where she told you that took place? What do you have a clear memory of?
I have a clear memory of the conversation.
Can you tell me, when was your last contact with Susan?
I can't tell you that. I don't know.
Do you remember if you spoke to her near the time of her death?
I don't remember that.
And specifically, so let me go this way. I want you to assume that she was killed in late the night of December 22nd or early the night of December 23rd of 2000.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to assume that.
All right.
My question to you would be, as you sit here today, do you recall, do you think you would have spoken to her a day, a week, a month, a year? How often, when do you think you spoke to her?
Possibly months before that.
And as you sit here, do you have a memory as to the whatever you talked about?
I don't. I can say it was probably, she would often tell me about opportunities, and then she would end it by saying, so I'm hopeful.
How did you find out that she'd been murdered?
Karen Hooper called me.
And who is that?
She is the wife of a friend of mine.
And did you find out about that soon in time afterward, or was it some time after the murder? In other words, to the best of your memory, how soon after her murder did you find out about it?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
Based on, do you think it was days or weeks, or was it months or years?
I imagine whatever Paul was days, probably, weeks at the most.
If I were to ask you, was Susan Berman a loyal person to her friends?
100%.
And have you previously said that in fact, she was 1,000% loyal to her friends?
Yes.
And with respect specifically to Bobby Durst, based on your relationship with her and based on your observations of Susan, did she appear to be a loyal friend to Bobby Durst?
Absolutely.
I want you to assume the following hypothetical. I want you to assume that Bob Durst came to Susan Berman, told him that he had been involved in an argument with his wife, and that during that argument, he had unintentionally killed her. If he had asked Susan Berman to provide an alibi for him, do you believe, based on the relationship you had with her and your knowledge of her relationship with Mr. Durst, that she would have done so?
Yes.
I couldn't hear I don't want to hear the answer. I object, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Wait, Your Honor, they didn't give, I thought it's objection with grounds. There's no grounds. You just said objection.
And he said sustained.
With no
That means-
grounds.
Okay. Well, you can argue with him, too?
I can't respond if I don't know the grounds, Your Honor. I'm trying to the court. There's certain rules. I want to play by the rules of the court. What are the grounds?
Would you, Your Honor, please enforce the rules?
When the court said the rules are stated grounds for objection, he hasn't done it.
It's pretty obvious. You asked a hypothetical. It's an improper hypothetical.
Your Honor, I think
Improper hypothetical.
Sustained. Stricken.
Your Honor, then I think at this point, rather than re-ask the question, I think I need to approach the court to find out exactly what is improper about the hypothetical. I want to make sure I'm in compliance with the court's rulings, and I don't want to just re-ask the question without understanding it.
Come on up, Mr.
Thank you.
Dwayne.
I promise you, every time you rule against me, I won't ask for an explanation.
That'll save us time.
right, objection sustained. Rephrase your question.
Thank you, Your Honor. So if you can, Ms. Newman, listen to my question very carefully. Given the way that Susan Berman spoke about Bob Durst and the closeness of the relationship that she represented to you, and given what you know about Susan Berman and her loyalty, do you believe that if Robert Durst had come to Susan Berman and asked her to do something to help him regarding the death of his wife, that she would have done it?
Absolutely.
Let me just take a look here. You were previously questioned on January 22nd, 2001, is that correct?
Yes.
At that time, did you, to the best of your memory, was that the only time prior to 2015 that you were interviewed?
Yes.
And I want you to assume for a moment that January 22nd is approximately 1 month after Susan Berman had been murdered.
Okay.
At the time that you were interviewed, did you have any desire to be involved in a murder investigation?
No.
At the time of that interview, did you answer all of the investigator's questions honestly in terms of the questions that he asked?
Yes.
Did the investigators ask you any questions about Robert Durst?
No.
To the best of your memory, did they even mention his name?
No.
Now, you were previously asked during the 2015 interview that you had with myself and investigators. That's the first time, correct, that you related the information that you have testified to about Susan Berman and the false alibi, correct?
That's correct.
Were you ever asked by law enforcement about that prior to the 2015 interview?
No.
Is it fair to say that between 2001, when you had that interview, the first one in 2015, that you became aware that you very likely had information that might be relevant to this case? At some point.
Yeah.
And is it fair to say that you were reluctant to come forward with that information?
Yes.
Can you tell us why?
Because my memory of that time is so vague, and because I feel tremendous shame that I did not appreciate the gravity of what she was telling me, how irresponsible I felt I'd been.
And I want to ask you, when you say your memory, I just want to be clear, how certain are you of your memory that in fact Susan told you that she had phoned in a false alibi for Robert Durst?
I'm completely certain.
And at any point in time, between 2001 and 2015, did you have any other reason that you were concerned about coming forward?
Yes.
And what was that?
I became aware of other crimes that were allegedly attributed to Mr. Durst.
Would that have been the Morris Black
Yes.
killing? And you were aware in that case that there was a dismemberment involved, is that correct?
Yes.
And how did that affect you, knowing that Mr. Durst had dismembered somebody and was tried for murder? How did that affect your willingness to want to volunteer information that you had?
It was motivating.
It motivated you which way?
Well, I mean, it frightened me, but if you're saying, if you're asking me whether the seriousness of that crime makes me more motivated to testify today, the answer is yes. At the time, the whole thing scared me, and
Right.
I wanted to stay away from it.
Right, so what I'm asking you is, between 2001 and 2015, you had no contact with any investigators, is that correct?
That's correct.
You also, though, did not pick up the phone and call investigators to say what you knew. Is that a
That's
fair
correct.
statement?
Yeah.
And is that because of the reasons that you now just described?
Yes.
Do you recall during the 2015 interview, when you mentioned the information about the alibi, Do you recall if you were told that you would likely be a witness at trial?
Yes, I was.
And what were you told?
I was told I was likely to be a witness at the trial.
And what was your response to that when you were told that?
Oh, hell.
Do you recall at the time saying that you regretted having told us what you know, since you were now going to have to testify as a witness?
Yes.
Do you recall using the word specifically, I'm hearing, strike that. Do you recall being asked, I'm hearing a little regret that you told me what you told me, and that you answered yeah?
That's correct.
And is that how you felt on that date?
Yes.
As you sit here today and you're providing this testimony, were you told, hey, listen, Laraine, if you want to come down and testify, sure. If not, was this kind of the equivalent of we asked you to the prom and you could say, I don't really want to go, I'm going with somebody else?
I wouldn't characterize it that way.
Pretty much, were you told that you needed to come down under subpoena if you didn't want to be voluntarily here?
Yes.
I want to ask you, when I say the name Miriam Barnes, is that someone that you've ever had a conversation with about any statements that Susan Berman made to you or made to her?
No.
Do you know who Miriam Barnes is?
I don't.
When I say the name Susie Harmon, is that someone that you know?
Yes.
Have you ever had a conversation with Susie Harmon about any statements that Susan Berman allegedly made to her about helping Bob Durst cover up his missing wife Kathy's death?
No.
Do you know Robin Morse?
No.
And I would assume that if you don't know Robin Morse, you've never had a conversation with her about Robert Durst or anything else, correct?
Correct.
Do you know Nick Chabin?
Yes.
Have you ever had a conversation with Nick Chabin about any statements that Susan Berman made to you or made to him about helping Bob Durst cover up his missing wife Kathy's death?
No, that didn't happen.
Do you know Mela Kaufman?
Yes.
Have you ever had a conversation with Mela Kaufman about any statements that Susan Berman made to you or made to her about helping Bob Durst cover up his missing wife Kathy's death?
We did not.
Do you know Paul Kaufman?
Yes.
Have you ever had a conversation with him about any statements that Susan Berman made to you or made to him about helping Bob Durst cover up his missing wife's death?
No, it didn't happen.
Do you know Linda Obst?
Yes.
And let me back up. When I say, and I should have asked this, let's go back to the first one. Did you know Miriam Barnes?
I don't.
Okay, Susie Harmon?
Yes.
How well did you know Susie Harmon?
Not well at all.
Have you ever had any in-depth conversations with her about anything that you can recall?
I can't recall, no.
Robin Morse, did you know or not know?
I do not know Robin Morse.
Nick Chabin, you said you knew him. How well did you know Nick?
Not well. I met him when I was still doing SNL through Susan. But
Have you ever had any deep conversations with Nick Chabin about anything?
No.
Mela Kaufman, you know, is that correct?
Yes.
Have you ever had any deep conversations with Mela Kaufman about any subjects?
No.
Paul Kaufman, how well did you know him?
Not well.
Have you ever had any deep conversations with him about anything?
No.
And I asked you if you knew Linda Obst.
Yes, I did.
And how well do you know Linda Obst?
I've known her for many, many years. I met her when I was still doing SNL. But I wouldn't say that we're close.
Have you ever had a conversation with Linda Obst about any statement that Susan made to her or that was made to her about helping Bob Durst cover up his missing wife, Kathy's death?
No.
I want to talk a little bit about your drug use. Is this something that has been a subject that has caused you a lot of difficulty in your life?
Yes.
And in terms of the idea of coming into court and discussing it, is that something that appeals to you or does not appeal to you?
It does not appeal to me.
And can you explain briefly why?
Well, the association with that kind of behavior and substances in general would indicate that my memory of things could be challenged.
Let me ask you something. In your drug use, has that ever led you to forget things that have happened?
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Has your drug use ever led you to remember things that didn't?
No.
Do you have any doubt in your mind as you sit here today, that Susan told you the information that you've testified to?
No doubt.
And in testifying today, you indicated that you basically now make your living, you're a voiceover actress, right?
Yes.
You are very skilled at doing all kinds of voices, right? You have a 4-octave range, is that correct?
Yes. How do you know that?
I do my homework.
It's creepy.
Thanks.
And is it fair to say that in the work that you do with children, and working on children's cartoons, etc., that coming into a courtroom where it's televised and where in the city where you work, that the idea of coming in and talking about this subject matter and your prior drug use is not something that you believe is going to be helpful potentially to your career?
Correct.
And in the end, what made you come in and do it?
I was compelled to do it.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
I can get started, Your Honor.
You want to start now?
A few questions just before we break.
Okay, you may.
Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Mr. Durst's lawyer, along with some other fellows. You commented that you were worried about being impugned. As someone that's helped a lot of people in recovery, I'm assuming you're in recovery, correct?
Yes.
You understand that nobody is impugning you because you were an addicted person. You understand that, correct?
I understand the difference, yes.
Right. The impugning, if that's what it should be called, or the questions about your memory are the things that your years and years of drug addiction could affect, correct?
Can you restate that?
You started using when you were about 13,
Yes.
and you used into your mid-20s?
Till I was 35.
Until you're 35. So we're talking 20 years of regular use, correct?
Yes.
And again, understanding that we didn't call you, they did.
Correct.
And I have to ask these questions.
Of course.
You used a whole set of drugs, did you not?
Not really, just mainly cocaine.
Did you ever use heroin?
Oh, briefly.
Okay.
Yes.
So you used coke and you used heroin,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And you are, of course, aware that both of those are very strong narcotics, correct?
Yes.
Highly addictive, correct?
I wouldn't say cocaine is physically addictive.
But psychologically,
Probably.
yeah, creates a dependence.
Yes.
And for example, when you guys were so frenetic in putting the show together and working all night, there was a lot of cocaine around, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And it affected actually other cast members, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Some of whom, one of whom at least, passed away
Yes.
right here in Los Angeles, correct?
Yes.
That's Mr. Belushi. Is that a yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and I think he was doing what they call speedballs, both coke and heroin?
That's correct.
Okay. And you would acknowledge that doing those type of drugs are physically debilitating, correct?
Yes.
Very bad for you, correct?
Yes.
And one of the reasons that they're bad for you is they affect how your mind functions, correct?
Can you be more specific about how it affects the way the mind
Well,
functions?
I think you once said that sometime you walked into a room and you didn't even remember why you were there. Remember saying
That's
that?
happened more recently because of menopause.
Okay.
I wouldn't have triggered that to drugs.
Well, I think you were responding to your interview with Mr. Lewin about your memory, and you commented, sometimes I would walk into rooms and not know why I had entered.
I
Remember?
did not cause any
That
menopause.
did
Your
not.
Honor. Accused of a lot of things.
I never said that.
Okay, well, we'll get some time tomorrow and I'll show you where I think you said that,
All
okay?
right.
Thanks. Now, let's see. It's January 22nd, of '01. Is that a yes? You understand
Yes.
that time frame?
Yes, I do.
And you are meeting with two detectives, Stevens and Coulter. Do you remember that?
I don't remember their names, but I'll take your word for it.
Did you happen to see Detective Coulter when you were coming in and he was leaving?
I wouldn't know him if I saw him.
So you wouldn't even remember what the detective that was interviewing you about the murder of your beloved friend looked like?
That's correct.
Okay. So they come and they interview you, and you explained, as you did on direct, that your involvement with Susan kind of fell off when you got married and had kids. Is that fair?
That's right. It was less frequent.
But you did tell them, when they interviewed you, that you last spoke to Susan Berman on December 22nd at 2 p.m. Do you remember telling them that?
I don't remember telling them that, but if I said it, then it was true.
Okay, so I don't have to, I could refresh your recollection, but you'll take my word that you
I
said
will
it?
take your word for it, yes.
Okay. And in the conversation, which you described as being about 40 minutes, talking to Susan a few days before her murder, you said you talked about career updates, correct?
I honestly do not remember what I spoke to those detectives about, so I will take your word for it.
Okay, I can't approach Your Honor and let her have a chance to read this if it helps her.
I mean, again, even if I were to see the statements, I don't remember what was said.
Okay, so you can't remember what you said in January of 2001, but in response to Mr. Lewin's questions about what Susan Berman told you, you're 100% certain.
Well, I think that that's much more memorable than
More
what was I think it's more memorable than what was the last thing you said to her.
Okay, well,
What was your last conversation? What was the topic? I think being told that other thing
Yeah.
is a lot more memorable.
More memorable than talking to the policemen that are trying to solve the murder of your dear beloved friend?
Well, you can frame it that way if you
Well, I
want.
just did. Do you think it's more memorable?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so let's keep going with the things you talked about. I'll try to help refresh your recollection. You talked about pending deals. Is that right? If I say so?
If you say so.
And then you said, and general gossip.
Yeah.
Okay. You said it lasted 40 minutes, and you told the detectives Berman did not discuss any recent problems with anyone.
That's correct, I
Okay.
suppose.
Your Honor,
Okay.
this is-
I don't remember her
Your Honor,
ever
objection,
talking
this is
about that.
improper impeachment, it's not refreshing recollection.
So you told the police that Ms. Berman did not discuss any type of problem that she was having with anyone at that point in time, correct?
If it says there in the transcript that
Question
I,
lacks foundation,
Yeah.
she says she doesn't remember, and then she's asked questions about it.
Perhaps your first idea was the better one, to see if notwithstanding what she's told you, if reading it might refresh your recollection. Because all you're doing is reading it out loud, so give it to her.
Leave me alone.
You don't want a stipulation? Fine, Dave.
Okay, go ahead. What's the stipulation?
If you want, I'm more than happy to stipulate that she told the detective what is in the report. But she doesn't remember. I'm happy to stipulate to that. She says she doesn't remember.
Okay, but how do I elicit it then?
Very simply, I am willing to stipulate.
Do you have you're okay with the stipulation?
Present the stipulation, and I'll tell you if I approve.
It sounds like he did,
I
so
will-
go ahead.
I will stipulate that if it is otherwise admissible, given the California rules of evidence, that the fact that the witness does not remember specifically what she said, that I will not object to Mr. Chesnoff questioning her regarding that information, and that he can assume that it was said. That's the problem that we have. We have a foundation issue. She's saying, I don't remember.
if you have a record of it, then I must have said it.
So let's, very well. Let's work out these nuances, but not on the jury's time.
I
on this
couldn't
woman's
agree
time.
more, Your Honor.
So what I'm going to do is excuse our jurors. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll do our darndest to start right at 9 o'clock, as I always try. We'll try again, maybe we'll succeed. 9 o'clock, be here, just in case we can. 9 o'clock. Ms. Newman, I'm going to ask you to read your return for tomorrow. 9 o'clock. The witness has a schedule problem, and as I've done for other witnesses, I'd be happy to accommodate her. She has a work obligation at 10 a.m. Now, how far away is your work obligation?
It's at Colfax and Ventura.
So that's, so North Hollywood is, that's about a 40-minute drive, so that's not so good if you're here at 9 o'clock.
No, I would definitely accommodate someone that I watched through my entire college.
Yeah, we're all fond of you, discuss that. So, with that being said, the problem is that tomorrow we're breaking, well, actually, there is a juror, or tomorrow is 2:30 is the time we said we would break. Can we do this between 1:30? She said you can be here at 1:30.
Yeah, I'm just seeing how long they've booked me for, because it may be that I have a specific, 11:45, or 10:45, so it's a 45-minute session.
So 1:30 would be all right?
Yeah. or
Your Honor, is there
Can we
any
get it
way,
done in 1 hour?
Your Honor, is there any way that possibly we could break early and come back at 1 tomorrow? And that way we would have an hour and a half, and in talking to Mr. Chesnoff, we believe that would certainly do
So
it.
before I do that, I talk with staff. I don't just order people around, you know.
Just me.
You I order around, but you're a special
With
case.
no success.
You're a special case. Let's see, so the idea is that we would break earlier. Break at 11, you said?
11:30 for lunch, and then we could be back at 1, then she would have an hour and a half
You
to
do
finish
that?
her testimony.
Oh, Ron? He'll do it. You good? And is that, will that work for you?
I won't be here, but I'll let they just do it. They'll be fine.
Okay, so then, that's, breaking it, maybe he's checking with the sergeant. You're good? He's good, check with the sergeant. So let's do that, we'll come back at
1 o'clock then, Your Honor?
1 o'clok.
And we'll do something else in the morning.
Yeah,
What are you gonna do in the morning?
we'll do Stuart Altman.
Oh, God. Reconsider, Your Honor.
No, it's an inside joke.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you, so back at 1 o'clock.
All right, thank you.
All right, the witness is ordered back at 1 o'clock, anything else?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else, Mr. Chesnoff?
No, thank you very much.
Department 1's adjourned. Oh, I missed it. Department 1's adjourned.